Hello everybody, we are here today at the 2022 National Association of Secretary of State Summer Conference in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And today we're here with Timothy Reiniger, who is going to talk to us about the Virginia Remote Online Authorization Law, important points that you will find very helpful to your education. So, Timothy?
Thank you, Jeannie. It's a pleasure and honor to be here with you and support the efforts of the Cyber Notary Virtual Training Academy. And I'm happy to talk about the Virginia law. So I'm happy to go right into the history of it.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
It's
yes.
The efforts to promote electronic notarization. That is an in-person process, the signer and the notary being in the same room with a computer. These efforts have gone back to year 2000, and a number of states had adopted laws for that in North Carolina, Kansas, Delaware, Virginia even. And we found that by 2010 there was still very little adoption. Not many people were using these laws. But the bankers, land titling companies, and lawyers came to us and said, why don't we leverage the emerging teleconference capabilities and the growth, expansion of fiber optics, broadband throughout regional, rural areas. It started to make sense. Really before 2010, I view it as great theory to have an online process, but it needed more of the bandwidth capability to do this. So Virginia had no models to look to, so we had to create the first law, and I was happy to be involved in writing that. I happen to have expertise in identity credentialing, identity management, so especially with some federal standards, so that's how that ended up being incorporated in the Virginia law. It didn't pass the first time, 2010. Notary associations opposed it, thinking it was too radical to depart from the physical presence, traditional requirement for the notary. But it passed in 2011, went into effect in 2012. It was very controversial with other states, secretaries of state, even here we are in NAS. The Secretary of State, especially in North Carolina, was very vocally opposed to it. And we just learned today that she was at the bill signing in North Carolina with the governor there, just by coincidence. So that shows you that after 10 years, how far we've come. And now, I think 43 states have the law. So, but anyway, happy to talk a little bit about some important aspects of the law.
Yes, absolutely.
So the identity verification from the beginning was viewed as the most challenging aspect, and it is to this day still, and it always will be for online notarization, and it's going to be constantly evolving. Fortunately, the Virginia law now has the most flexible requirements for that, unlike some other states. And among other things, it allows greater flexibility for verifying foreign signers. So that's just a tremendous advantage you all have as notaries. There has been, in the last year or so, kind of an update to the law to give detail about credible witnesses. I think we were talking about that before this interview, and so it lays out one credible witness being required, but it also incorporates the concept of what's called a credential analysis, which is really an outgrowth from the federal NIST government standards. The Virginia law has what's called an antecedent in-person proofing process. And an aspect of that is just establishing the authenticity of the previously issued identity credential. So that's where they have that phrase, credential analysis.
So a remote online notary can identify a person, a signer who doesn't have a U.S. issued identification, such as driver's license, passport. So the signer could be from another country and then use a credible witness for that notarial act.
Yep. So
Okay.
that's right. So there are various options. You have option one, if the notary has personal knowledge of the signer. Option two, if there is a credible witness, then that is a very powerful tool. And we can talk about that. But then, without those, the notary needs to have two types of identity authentication or proofing, they call it. And which were already in the law, but there's a slight upgrade that also expressly references identity proofing as defined by the Virginia Identity Management Standards Council. So that comes out of a law I also was involved in writing and supporting back in 2015. And it gets very little attention up to this point, but that is the Commonwealth of Virginia has issued guidance documents that very closely track, again, the federal standards of the Department of Commerce and NIST, which allow for the use of biometrics for authentication, the use of one-time passwords to an iPhone, various techniques. This will also the capability of using digital certificates, and especially this is popular with members of the military and federal government workers and government contractors who have secured digital certificates. But again, the notary has to have the capability to verify all this. But in theory, these are all available. There's a lot of great options. And you're right, now the credible witness, if the notary, so the credible witness has to know the signer. If the notary doesn't have personal knowledge of the credible witness, then the notary has to make sure that that witness has gone through the kind of remote identity verification process.
That's important. That's great. That answered the questions of some of the CMBTA students. They have that concern in the past as well. And what about the journal of a remote online notary? What's the proper way to handle the journal when it comes to recordings and maintaining the journal for 5 years?
Yeah, so the Virginia law contemplated the use of the online notary process just for electronic documents. And that's the way Florida has done it, and Texas, but then some other states since that time have said, geez, why can't we use the online process also for paper documents? But Virginia is electronic, and we found for various reasons, the states that authorized notarization of electronic documents in general, and especially with the online process, had no problem incorporating a requirement for an electronic journal. And states that would never enact a paper journal requirement for paper material acts because of opposition from legal groups and notaries who want to go through the extra work and expenses. But it's never been I don't know of any state that's rejected the idea of an electronic journal. So this is a journal in electronic form, and in Virginia it's only required for electronic acts, not all acts. However, it's best practice to keep a journal, as we know, as you train notaries, and there's nothing to stop you as a notary from doing that.
the Secretary of State of Virginia recommends to every remote notary and traditional notary to keep a journal. So, and as a remote online notary, even though keeping an electronic journal is part of the law, as a good practice as well, if you're willing to do so, you can also keep a tangible journal of your remote online notarization transactions, or also instead of just keeping the electronic journal that is probably going to be generated by the wrong platform that you're going to be using, because a lot of those journals are generated at the same time. You can create your own and adding more information that is pertinent to you, that you're going to remember, that is advisable. It will help you remember more about that particular moment during the remote online notarization transaction with that particular signer. So it's up to you to do that and keep it if you want to go above and beyond as a remote online notary.
And most of the providers who you might sign up with or license the platform from have built in this notary journal capacity, so it makes it really easy. You need to fill in some of the required entries are automatically populated with them. I mean, you could always create your own, but that's difficult to do. But the providers do that. But the key is you have the responsibility to maintain these journals, to create them, maintain them, make sure that they're maintained for at least 5 years, and that they stay under your exclusive control. So the providers cannot use them. Access can be granted only according to the law and specified by the Secretary of the Commonwealth and the assurance standard. For law enforcement requests a copy and all that. Which the whole thing, that's an interesting subject in itself that you can access, but the point is you have responsibility for it, exclusive control, and should make sure that a backup is kept.
And on that note, I have questions before I came here to the 2022 NAS Summer Conference here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I had questions from some of the students asking, when a title company because one of the students had this question from a title company in Florida requesting the audio-visual recording of a notarial act from a signing, from a signing. So how a remote online notary in Virginia can handle that request if it's part of a journal and only either the Secretary of State or in the law, like police, law enforcement are the ones who can actually request that. But how do they handle the title what do they say to the title company if the title company wants to see the video? Can they do that? I don't think they can send the video to the title company because that's like part of the privacy of the whole Notarial Act.
Yeah, this is a big issue that's emerging with the growth and adoption of the online notarization processes throughout the country. And the states are handling this differently. Now, this was not anticipated in great detail with the Virginia law being the first as it's evolved. But the law does allow for, when a notary receives a request for a journal entry, the notary can provide the entry and charge a fee, in some fashion. If someone wants verification of something happened at a certain date. The notaries. We have more and more entities asking for copies of the audio video, and the notary can't give a copy of the audio video recording. Like I say, law enforcement may ask for access, or if there's a legal dispute, there can be a request for that, but to just give it to the land title company, it's not. So there have been some of the land title companies, others will want to, in other states, we should have agreements with the providers that on an as-needed basis, if they need to get access to their audio recording, they want to have agreements so they can. But the Virginia law hasn't yet given that type of authority.
So we were talking about the case when a remote online notary has to share either the video recording or some information from the electronic journal. And our friend here, Timothy Reiniger, is going to give you an example of that.
Yeah, there was a recent case in Washington State that involved a land fraud. There was a homeowner was on a business trip in China, and while he was gone, an imposter claiming to be that person signed away the property, sold it to someone. But the notary was from Virginia. It was an online notarization, the Virginia notary, and but there was a title company and another realtor company and so forth. The notary obviously did not properly identify this supposed signer, otherwise this would have been caught as an imposter. That the notary didn't perform the credential analysis and just visually looked at one side of the driver's license over the audio video, but the key is that there was a recording that was accessed for the court dispute. So there's a case where these audio video, they're not meant to be easily shared, and all jurists recommend saying, Jeannie, but for a court dispute. And so the court in Washington State had the audio video, and they have the imposter on tape, and also what the notary did with the identification process. So it was valuable evidence, and there's been talk about this. This is the first known case out of hundreds of thousands of online notarizations since 2012. And in my view, this case bears out the strength of this process. And they're going to always be fraudsters and all that, but it proves what the Virginia legislators saw, that this evidence of the audio-video recording is better than anything that exists in the paper process.
That's great. That's wonderful to hear from you, and the fact that remote notarizations are great when it comes to notarizing documents, notarial acts nowadays. Now, another change that was in the Virginia law recently has to do with the notarial certificates when it is done remotely. So, will you please share a little bit about that?
Sure. So now you must specify in the notarial certificate that the notarial act was performed using audio-video communication technology. There, all the states now require this with various terms of art. I don't have it in front of me to make sure they use the wording that's specified in the statute.
I believe it's remote notarization.
Okay, so that's perfect, and that's easy to do and make sure. And anyway, it's interesting that when we did the law originally, we expressly did not include that. Just as a historic note, because back in 2011-12, we knew that some of the banks and others were unsure about the online notary process in Virginia. They were critical, and some of them were saying, well, if we get an online notarization in Virginia, we're not going to accept it. We're not. So we thought, well, then we're not going to put in the law that it's an online notarization. So when they would receive it, it would just look like any other electronically notarized document. But now, as the years have gone forward, after the next 5-10 years, the same critics, thankfully entitled, have come to realize that this process is far superior to the paper process. So now there's an advantage for sure to be indicating the Material Act that was done using this process. So that tells them that there's going to be an audio video recording that's available, that enhanced methods of identity verification have been used.
So now that I'm listening to you and trying to recall, it's better that you check the practical guide to remote online notaries available at cnbta.club/shopnow. There's a practical guide there, and it tells you to the example. So I don't know if it's remote online authorization or remote authorization. So just check it out and you'll find out on that one as well, just to make sure.
Yes, so that is some of the basic changes. So we've covered certificate language, electronic journal requirement, the involving identity verification requirements for the notary. Maybe we can touch on a little bit of jurisdictional issues, and sometimes there's confusion over this, but again, you all as notaries are public officers, and as a public officer, you have what is called a personal jurisdiction. That, in the fancy way of thinking about it as a lawyer, is the authority has to be invoked. In other words, you can't just walk down the street by someone and notarize something. The person has to know, intentionally be invoking your authority as a notary. It sounds kind of funny, but there have been cases like that. Believe it or not, a lot of cases where people were said that they didn't know that the person was even a notary before the Material Act. So there has to be a knowing situation. And so now with an online notary process, that instead of the authority being invoked with a physical presence, now it can be done with audio, video, and Sonder can be anywhere in Virginia, outside of Virginia, anywhere in the world. It's an unbelievably powerful legal tool to access the notary as a public officer in Virginia. Now, this is separate from the substantive jurisdiction of involving the documents and what documents can be signed electronically or can be in electronic form. That's not in the material laws, but that's more in the general statutes. And a big example of this would be wills. And wills are authorized to be done electronically only in 10 states. So the background here is that the original signature laws, federally signed law and so forth, expressly carved out exempted wills and trusts, testamentary trusts and stuff. So those entities, they have to be a separate piece of legislation to authorize it. So Virginia doesn't have that yet. And so, if anywhere, it's not possible to be witnessing wills, have witnesses sign wills by audio video in Virginia, unlike Florida, Arizona, Utah, Washington, some other states.
So this is for when the paperwork is going to be filed, the document is going to be filed in Virginia. But let's see, if the document comes from another state, and then let's see if it's a will or if there is a trust, and they use a Virginia remote online notary to notarize that, will that be okay?
Yes.
Okay.
So because the distinction here is, as you pointed out, if it's a state that authorizes electronic will, but by the way, the document that tends to be notarized with wills would be what's called the self-proving affidavit of the witnesses. So wills themselves, except for 1 or 2 states, are not directly notarized with acknowledgement, but the self-proving affidavits of the witnesses are. So a notary could do that. It's not recognized in Virginia per se, but it would. Other states that allow electronic wills could do that. So there's nothing, because of the interstate recognition laws, that would prevent them from using you as a Virginia online notary.
And one quick question about, now that we mentioned the word trust, there are documents in other states that require the signer to sign as the John Doe as trustee of certain trusts. So if the document is going to another state, that's fine, but for the Virginia remote online notary, for the Virginia notaries, is the signer can do that too, or is not necessary?
The Virginia notary can certify to the capacity of the signer. Mm-hmm. So the signer can sign as a trustee or a personal representative, or absolutely. So, to my knowledge, California is the one state that prohibits that. Mm-hmm. But Virginia, the other states, you can. So.
Okay. Oh, that's great. That's great. So I think for now, we're gonna just leave it at this. We will have Timothy Reiniger with us, probably with us sometime soon, maybe talking more about the Virginia law as the remote online notarization laws continue to evolve. We never know when some changes can happen or additions. So he will always be involved for what we know, since he has been with the remote online notarization technologies from the beginning. So this is great, and it is an honor to have him with us today, and I hope, Timothy, that you are with us in the future as well. You are a friend to the Cyber Notary Virtual Training Academy, but still an honor to have you here, and we really appreciate the fact that you use some of your time to be with us, so our remote online notaries can learn from you what's really going on with the laws of remote online notarization.
Well, Jeannie, it's been a real honor and pleasure. By the way, I love the fact that you use the term cyber notary, and that goes back to the American Bar Association back in the late 1990s, where they were seeing a vision of using the online world way before it was really possible. They conceived of it as a cyber notary. They could see it as a enhanced notary professional. So it's wonderful that you have taken that and really marching forward and developing and training notaries to be cyber notaries.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for watching, and see you again soon.